is of biblical readings from the Old Testament, and the other handout has the parable of Good Samaritan on one side, and then another worksheet that is called the Two Feet of Love in Action. So it's just two handouts. We're going to do an exercise with the first handout that has the biblical readings. So if you can put the other handout to the side and just concentrate on the one that has the biblical reading from the prophet Isaiah and from the warning of the flood. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to really acknowledge again all of you for coming. We're going to have a little bit of time in a minute to ask questions. And we're going to review what we did last week. But first, we're going to start with a prayer. And Deacon Sal will help us with the prayer. And what I would like us to do is to listen to the prayer that Deacon Sal will help us recite, profess.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, hath freed you from sin, give you new birth by water and by the Holy Spirit, and join you to his people. He now anoints you with the chrism of salvation, so that you may remain members of Christ, priest, prophet, and king, unto eternal life.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Deacon Sal. I started my ministry work being a volunteer for the baptism ministry at St. Mary's. All of us who live in Oceanside are familiar with St. Mary's, which is at the other end of the city. I really enjoy being a minister because I had a chance to be right next to the priest when he was able to anoint the child, especially with the christening. And one of the things that I really appreciated about that for myself is that I almost saw that as a miracle. It's one of those miracles that you get to see even though it's not your own family, right? I think that as a parent, and when you go through the process, when you go through the rite, it's a fascinating experience. But as an outsider, you also are very fortunate to enjoy that miracle of salvation when the rite of baptism takes place. I would like to point your attention to the three different titles that our liturgy asks us to embrace: priest, prophet, and king. For tonight's class, we're going to concentrate a lot on the prophet role. Because the prophetic role in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, has a lot to say about social justice and about caring for those around us, and by demonstrating our love for God by what we do in society. So let's keep that in mind. As a prophet, there's two different things that we're asked to do, and we're going to look into that in a minute. But all of you are prophets and prophetess, and there's a long tradition of female prophets in the Asian Near East. So much in the same way that there's so much that we don't know about the different roles of the Old Testament, there's a long record of female prophets during that time of civilization. Let me put the class objectives on the screen just to keep us. This is going to be like a roadmap. These are the objectives that we're going to follow. Think about this as bus stops. When you're riding the bus, you have to know your destination. And many times, you have to go through the whole process of going through the whole itinerary to be able to reach your destination. In this case, these are 4 stops. First, we're going to learn about God and evil, a concept that in theology we call theodicy. We'll explain that in a minute a little better. Second, talk about the prophetic role. And the prophetic role means a lot to me. A year ago, I had a chance to speak with Tim, who is one of the participants here tonight. And one of the things that I described to Tim is that the initials for my academic title are MTS, Master of Theological Studies. I had to write a thesis to be able to receive my degree. And I concentrated on the book of the prophet Isaiah, the last 11 chapters of the book, which are chapters 56 to 66. It's a fascinating period of the history of the salvation of the people of Israel. So we're going to talk a little bit about the book of Isaiah. Thirdly, we're going to talk about God's righteousness. How do we understand God's righteousness? We have two components, charity and social justice. And lastly, I would like you to consider Catholic social teaching as asking us to do two things. One is to answer God's call as an individual, and secondly, is coming together as a community of faith and responding to God's love to a present need in our society. So those will be our 4 objectives for tonight. But before we begin, let's remember the beautiful picture of the Garden of Eden that we came across last week. As you know, I am in the Ministry of Care for Creation. So anytime I see a beautiful image about the book of Genesis and how beautiful creation was, and how the first couple, Adam and Eve, had this loving relationship and friendship with all of it, it just really stirs my heart. And so being able to just witness it, it's a wonderful reminder. But if you look at the middle of the picture, we see something in the middle of the picture, right? Anybody, what do we see in the middle of the picture?
Snake.
So I have to apologize to you. I'm a little hard of hearing.
Snake.
So somebody has to raise their hand and tell me just one person at a time. Anybody, yes?
The forbidden fruit.
The forbidden fruit. We see Adam and Eve, and I think like both of them seem to be holding out the forbidden fruit, right? Like both of them are holding it, so to speak. We'll get there in a minute. But now before we move on, I'd like you to use the first hand I gave you, the one about the biblical obedience. And I would like you to grab a partner. So turn to the person next to you. In this case, I believe Mike. You may have to share with the young woman next to you. And just read to the other. We're going to take turns. The first person is going to read the warning of the flood to the other person. And then we're going to switch roles and do the same thing. So if I had a friend right next to me, I will be reading the warning of the flood first, and then I will be hearing the story. So in pairs, do that exercise. Read to the person next to you, and then listen to the person next to you. And take a little bit of time to do that. Go ahead.
Listen.
So just the reading of the warning of the flood. That's where we stop. If both of you has had a chance to read it to the other person? Yes? Okay, so put that aside for a second. So now I want all of us to reread what it says on the screen. So all of us at the same time, we're going to read it together. God looked at everything He had made and found it very good. Evening came and morning followed, the sixth day. Thank you. I explained to the class last week that I really appreciated the insertion of the word very in that verse of the Bible. Because it's not only good, but it's extremely good. It's very, very good. So that stands in contrast with the other reading that we just did, right? So there's a big, big contrast between those two passages. Let me ask you a couple of questions now. So first question that comes to mind is, what is the origin of evil? Second question is, why does evil take place? And the third question is, why do bad things happen at all to good people? So these are very important questions that all of us have to face in a journey of faith. All of us are challenged to understand God's goodness around us when everything hurts. Right? A couple of years ago, I lost my grandmother, and I did not have a chance to visit my grandmother when she was passing away. But I was able to speak with my grandmother, and the final thing that I remember my grandmother telling me was blessing me. So my grandmother blessed me over the phone, and she said, God bless you and your mom and your brother. And that's a wonderful memory that I carry with me. The fact that for us, as a person of faith, I believe wholeheartedly in the beauty of receiving a blessing. So it's a little tricky to understand how goodness and not so great goodness can happen at the same time. Let's go to the book of Genesis to think about two aspects of the book of Genesis. As I explained to the class last week, my unofficial mentor when I was getting my degree from the Franciscan School of Theology is Professor Dr. Garrett Galvin. Dr. Galvin specializes in the Old Testament, and it's because of him that I came to appreciate the beauty of the Old Testament. So we're going to be heavily talking about the Old Testament today. Let's read what it says on the screen. Out of the ground, the Lord God made grow everything that was delightful to look at, and good for food, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is one of the earliest references to evil in sacred scripture. So we know that from the onset, there is the tree of life, and there is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's especially important that we pay attention to that. There's a little bit of a controversy in theology as to whether both trees were right next to each other, right? There is that possibility that they were side by side, and that Adam and Eve had the same choice, had the same chance to pick one or the other. We don't know for sure whether that's the case or not. It's part of the theological debate, and perhaps we will only know when we get to heaven and we are hopefully reveal everything that we need to know. For us, what's important here is that there are these two beautiful trees, and they have two very different purposes. One is life, and the other is knowledge. And not only knowledge about good, but knowledge about evil. here has the wonderful ability to be fluent in more than one language. Right? Let me see those hands one more time. Anybody who has the wonderful ability to be fluent in two languages? We're going to talk a little bit about the semantics of a special word that gets used in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis was written, as we know, originally in Hebrew. The word that is used for fruit can be translated, or was translated when Saint Jerome translated the Bible into malus. The fascinating thing about that word choice is that malus can mean two different things. One is evil, and the other is the apple. So that's how we get the apple to be considered the forbidden fruit. But what else do we remember about the story of Adam and Eve? Anybody? We don't have the story there, but what do we know?
Snake.
There's a snake. So there's another character involved. So it's Adam, Eve, and the snake. What else do we know?
It started with Eve and then to Adam.
Right. The text presents the serpent, the snake, approaching Eve. Whether that was the first time, we don't know. It's possible that maybe Adam was as close to grabbing the forbidden fruit as Eve finally did. Right? Anyone else? What do we remember about the story? Yes?
Eve had a choice.
Eve had a choice. Can you tell us a little bit more?
To eat the apple or not.
Right. To eat the apple or not. Yes, Pat.
The choice was more fundamentally to do what God told you to, or to not do what God told you to.
Well, in terms of a concept, we can go with Pat, right? We understand something intellectually, right?
God said, do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Right, so here's the catch. There are things that we understand intellectually, and there are things that we need to understand with the heart. Right? We're not there yet, but great. That's a wonderful comment. So she had the choice of listening to what God said and following through, which is what our friends said: eat the apple or not eat the apple. What else do we know about the story?
Once they ate the apple, they started seeing evil and good.
But before that, so Eve eats the apple.
There was a deception. They were told that if you eat the apple, you'll be like God or something.
Right, so was the snake brutally honest with Eve?
No.
He never tells the whole truth.
Right, all the truth doesn't get revealed the way it should be, right? But one piece that we're missing is that she also gave it to Adam, right? So sometimes we involve someone else, right? Sometimes, last week we talked about private and public. Do we remember that? The distinction between some actions being private, something that I do leads to a public outcome. The tragic example that we referenced, and unfortunately we had another couple of cases yesterday, was the incident of gun violence, where somebody may have a personal mental health concern or issue. That's a private situation, and then it turns public when there's a mass shooting and people die. So we can say that in Eve and Adam, both of them had a private moment, a private act, and then it became public. It involved someone else. So what happened after they ate. Can you repeat what you said a minute ago?
They started being the same, they started seeing light and normal.
Well,
The minute it committed, it tried to get powerful, they saw right from wrong.
right. So we just don't know whether they tried to be powerful, right? Their understanding of what was going to happen may have been blurred. We just don't know. Can't assume what happened in their heads. What we know is that the text says that they acknowledged themselves being naked,
Right.
right? So they understood themselves in a different way. And they understood God in a different way. One of the biggest lessons that I learned from Deacon Sal is that when we're at Mass, our role is not only to understand about God, how do I relate with God, but also how can I serve God? And it's a twofold process. In this case, so Adam and Eve understood themselves differently, and then they understood their relationship to God differently. So they withdrew from God. God didn't withdraw from them, right? As we read the text, we read that that God came around in the evening looking for Adam and Eve, and wondering, God wondered, where are you? Do we remember that part of the story? Where are you? Right? And Adam says, well, first he says, I hid myself. Right? I hid myself. I didn't want to be with God. Okay. So we have now a before and after moment. How many of you have done something that you understand something a lot differently after doing that? Definitely, right? Yeah. Anybody care to give a good example? I gotta tell you a good example about this. So, as you know, I spend a lot of time with my grandmother, my other grandmother. So one of my grandmothers passed away, and I have a chance to spend a lot of time with my other grandmother. And with her, I've done a little bit of baking. I bake muffins, right? And that has been a new discovery for me. And especially cookies. I never knew it took so much work to bake cookies. And especially to cut cookies, to cut brownies. It's hard to cut those brownie squares. It's not easy, right? So first, when I would think of a brownie, I would think, oh, this is really delicious, it's amazing, it's chewy. But now I see that it takes a lot of blowing work to make that happen. And I understand and I appreciate my grandmother a lot better because of that. But in the case of Adam and Eve, so God had asked them, hey, not this one. Any other, but not this one. Right? So the text gives us the hint that they knew what was right and what was wrong. Because God had said it. This, but not that. So there is us hope. In our hearts, we know what's right and what's wrong. Innately. All of us do. For example, just something very simple. When babies are born, one of the very first things that probably moms will be better able to tell us, what is one of the first things that babies do when they are born? Cry. Nobody has to teach a baby to cry. Right? Nobody has to teach a baby to cry. And it's a way for the baby to tell you there is something wrong. Whether the baby is uncomfortable, whether the baby is hungry, whether the baby needs some real physical love, the baby cries. And thank you for helping us be relieved when we're crying. Right? Eventually we get older and we learn to express a specific needs. And sometimes in some of our cultures, we either learn to also hold back our tears, right? And that's very unfortunate too. So we undo some of the natural design that God put in our hearts. And it's very unfortunate that we do that. What happened after? So before they knew right and wrong, God had said, hey, this, but not this. Well, then they understood what it meant to eat from the fruit. So they ate from the fruit, and they finally realized, so this is what it meant. They had to face the consequences. Much in the same way that it happens with us. Before trying some things, we can only speculate that something could happen. If we do something that we shouldn't be doing, then we really understand and we are touched. We are hurt by some of the consequences. And we hurt other people in the process. So now we can go to the reading that you read. Go ahead and take your handout in front of you, and there's only one word that I highlighted in all of the page, right? Evil. What image do we get of humanity from that biblical passage? Is it a good or not so good image? Not so good. Not so good. I think it's a hurtful passage, right? I think that probably verse 6 is one of the most painful moments, right? Where it says, he, referring to God, regretted that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was grieved. As a parent, can you put yourself in God's shoes? When something that happened hurts so much that you wish you could undo it, right? I mean, I'm not saying that we're perfect, but last time we were talking about making imperfect choices. And sometimes our hearts really grieve when we made an incorrect choice. In this case, this is what the biblical text tells us. In good faith, we have to sympathize with God, be compassionate, and try to understand how did God feel at that moment. And then it introduces us to another character, right? Noah? And what do we know about Noah?
The ark. The ark.
The ark. The ark, and we know about the story of Noah in the sense that did Noah listen to God?
Yes.
Noah listened to God. And what else did Noah do? So he listened and then
Build the ark. And God.
he followed God's order. And it sounds very simple, right? It sounds exceptionally simple. God talks to us, we listen, and we follow through. Very simple process to do. Unlike Adam and Eve, right? So we can put a bit of a contrast between Adam and Eve on the one hand, and Noah on the other. Have any of you had a chance to go to Italy? Wow, wow. Were you invited chance to go into the Sixtine Chapel?
Oh, yes.
Wow. Wow. So this is the painting, the mural of the depiction of the flood by Michelangelo in the Sixtine Chapel. And what I would like us to do is just look at the image for a minute, look to the right, to the left, to the middle, and then the ark, it's at the back. Are people suffering? Well, let's look in the middle. Would you say that this couple in the middle is suffering? Yes? At least one of them is, right? The other person is carrying him. Guess that.
Can you zoom in?
Yeah. Right? So it's almost like the person is fainting. So I typically when we faint is because of something happening to us, right? Maybe we're in shock, or there's a physical illness already in place. So now, we started with this beautiful image of the Garden of Eden. Everything was great. God was happy. We were happy. And then we had the story of Noah and the flood and other incidents. And now here we understand. How do we understand good and evil? Well, in our Catholic tradition, we cannot fully understand why evil exists. That's beyond our understanding. We are not God to understand God's reasons for doing something. And what I would like us to keep in mind too is that in the biblical tradition, when we go to the Hebrew Bible, to the Old Testament, we get this image of God who sometimes gets upset. He gets very upset. Right? And that changes when we go into the New Testament. So for the people of Israel, the understanding of a God who would carry out punishment had more to do with the way that people were relating to each other and to Him. The relationship that God had with the people of Israel was breaking down. In the book of Leviticus, sometimes the formula is made that sin equals evil. If parents committed a crime against God, or some breaking of the norms of the society, then some type of punishment will be inflicted on the children. And that's a causal relationship, right? Something happens as a result of sin. And this is not, for us, the whole truth. It's part of the tradition that we have. But then we have the example of Jesus, which we talked about last week, that in our Catholic tradition points us to God's love. God is a loving God. And our response to God is what we consider personal choice. What we talked about earlier with the case of Adam and Eve. So we have God's love, personal choice, and social responsibility. So we're talking about this relationship that we have with God, me, my neighbor, in creation. We talked about that last week, the 4 different kinds of relationships that we have. And we call that moral living. So this is where we understand what Jesus is telling us. that this causal relationship between sin and evil doesn't hold true all the time. So, this is a passage from the Gospel of John, the man born blind. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so that the works of God might be made visible through him. So in this case, Jesus tells us that some evil or something that happens is not for us to understand what caused it. But we have to see the bigger miracle. God's love helping this man become part of the loving community one more time. So for us, we have this mandate from Jesus as well. Hey, there's times where we cannot be the judge. What we can do is ask God to intervene. And the miracle will happen. And it's much more complicated than that sometimes. But the idea is that judgment is for God to do. The solution is for us to help the other person see God's love and witness the outcome. So we're there to support the other person. So if we have this challenge of how do we distinguish good from evil, right? The same question that we had to make. It's the same choice that we had to make. How do we understand that? What is good and what is evil? We go to the Hebrew Testament and we understand that good is really what pleases God. So there's a bigger emphasis on understanding our response towards God. And we have two ways of understanding that. In the Old Testament, we have the covenant. God made a covenant with Abraham. And the covenant said that so long as we observe God's desires for us, that He will protect us and that He will bless us. Same with the Ten Commandments. Those were the guidelines that the people of Israel were supposed to follow. And the idea here is not so much that they're rules, but they're opportunities for us to follow God more closely. The Jerusalem temple. The Jerusalem temple gave the people the opportunity to be there with God. So the awareness that by being with God, God's righteousness will carry over in your life. And there was this physical opportunity to be so close to God that goodness will become part of your life. And lastly, the prophets. So the prophets had a very special role. And primarily the prophets had the big task of reminding the people of the covenant. Think of them as these spokespersons who gave you a reminder, almost like your parents from time to time, that hey, we need to do this. This is the way that we're supposed to follow through with something else. And we have the distinction of the major and minor prophets. Hopefully when we have the classes for the catechism of the church, you'll be able to talk a little bit more about the distinction between the major and the minor prophets. In the New Testament, we have Jesus as our exemplar. Right? He's the one who's showing us the distinction between good and evil. We also have the Holy Spirit, receive the gift of the Spirit, and then being able to discern what's good and what's God's will. The community of believers, all of us supporting each other to make the right choices. And lastly, the apostles and the disciples, also being the followers that help us remind ourselves that, hey, this is the way that other people have followed God throughout history. So let's summarize. Good and evil exist. Not doing good, primarily God's will, has consequences. We acknowledge two dimensions of sin, which are personal transgressions and social transgressions. And just a reminder that all of us are surrounded by both good and evil. And it's for us to decide which of those choices we're going to make. Last week, we spoke about God's righteousness as a wonderful plan. Yes, Pat?
I just had a question. If we think about Job, he was neither personal transgression nor social transgression.
Right. So
Topic than sin.
if we go back to let's work through the case of Job. What do we know about Job, Pat?
He was a good man.
He was a good man. But what else do we know about the story of Job?
God gave you Satan. What else? Satan life.
They get everything taken away from them.
Right.
Everything.
But if we go to the text, there is a conversation that happens between God and Satan or spirit, right? Well, we give him the name Satan to forces of evil. Thank you. The complicated thing about naming evil Satan is that we have to understand how we went from evil as a concept or as a force to evil as a personality. In this case, Satan. So, in the case of Job, we read that there is a conversation between God and let's call it Satan. What happens in that conversation? Anybody who knows?
God says, have you seen my good and faithful servant Job?
Mm-hmm.
Actually pointing out to Satan, and Satan says, I bet you would be so faithful if you allow this to be your favorite and you're giving him all these blessings. I bet you wouldn't be so faithful if you allowed certain calamities. And he says, would you let me do that? He says, go ahead, but don't hurt him. Go ahead.
Right. And then what does Job do during the book?
He continues to praise God.
He praises God, but there's a moment where he questions, right? What's happening to him, right? He really wants to know, why is this happening to me? And he demands an answer, or more than one answer. Right? He really needs to know, why did everything change so suddenly for me? And what answer does he get?
So did you create the heavens and the
So God tells Job, I'm sorry, I don't have to give you an explanation. And it's a little more complicated than that, but the point of the story, as I understand it, is that God allowed something to happen to Job, but he never left Job alone. What do we know about Jesus?
Same thing?
Jesus fulfilled a role of loving us and coming, being with us, teaching us the way, and then in the cross, what happens?
He said, "Why have you forsaken me?"
There's a moment, right, when we understand the humanity of Christ, of not knowing, not trusting so much that he doesn't know why.
Why have you forsaken me?
And that's the example that we're given. We have to trust so much in God's love and God's plan that we may not understand everything, but God has a plan. And it's for us to follow the same example, right? Same as Job. We can ask God all the questions in the world. And I was giving you the example last week with my brother, right? That I had a hard time getting out of bed every morning when I had to go to school. And I asked my brother all these questions, right? Why do I have to get up? Why do I have to go to school? And my brother would only love me. He would only teach me to get ready, and he would get me ready for school. And he knew something that I didn't knew, right? He knew that I had to go to school and that it was good for me. In the same way with Job, we can ask probably Father Oscar and Father Sam to maybe we can study Job together so we can understand the relationship between God and Job. And Job and who else? Who else is part of the story?
The devil.
Evil, but somebody else.
The wife.
His friends. Job's friends. There was this back and forth between Job and his friends. What is going on? And it's very, very close to us. When something happens to me that I don't understand, first, I can call my mom, right? Mom, I need your help with this. What's going on? Then I can reach to my grandmother. Grandma, help me out. But then I can also reach to my friends, reach out to my friends. And my friends in my community of faith can help me go through that. And that's the importance of understanding both this personal, what I do and what happens to me, and this public. How do I reach out to others? How do others help me in my journey of faith? So God's righteousness, thank you, Pat. I think what Pat asked really goes to the core of what we're going to talk about next. God's righteousness, you may remember I told you that I grew up with some evangelical friends, right? And I remember the debate that we would get into works, right? Why do I do good things for other people? Why do you do good things for other people? Anybody?
Sometimes because you love them.
Sometimes because I why else?
Because it's also the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do. Why else?
Feel compassion.
I have to be compassionate to other people, right? There's some misunderstanding sometimes that we do things to get to heaven, right? Have you ever thought about it that way? That, hey, are you doing the things that you're doing to get you to heaven? And it's a tricky question, right? Because we do want to get to heaven, right? I think that ultimately we want to be in God's presence. But if we are honest with ourselves, I think that all of us wants to be, all of us want to be happy. And the way to be happy is to have this love for God be part of everything that you do. And so it's not so much that you're thinking about the future, but you're thinking about today, and today will take you into the future. And it's a very way of looking at life. You're not just anticipating what's to come, but you're working every day on getting to where you need to go. So, God's righteousness, when we think of God's righteousness, we think of this justice and being in right relationship. This is important for us. Because when you are, for example, if you have a difficult boss, which many of us have experienced in our lives, what are some of the things that you can do to try to overcome that? If you have a difficult boss, what are some things that you can try to do? Anybody? Yes? Communicate better. Definitely. Something else? Anybody?
Rely on the support of your friends and family.
Rely on the support of your friends and family. Yes. Talk to your boss. Definitely. Definitely. So communicate better and talk to your boss. One of the, yes.
But one other thing I think in your next situation, maybe you need to do some self-analysis too, because maybe something you're doing is causing the difficulty.
Great. So when we spoke about the example of Adam and Eve, we said that they had a choice to make. They chose to eat or to not eat. In every relationship that we engage in every single one of them, we will have at the very least two choices all the time. So a very simple example. We communicate with them, or we don't communicate with them. Is that going to improve the relationship? It depends on what you do. If you communicate with them, it's quite likely that your boss will try to understand what is it that you're not doing correctly, or you yourself may begin to understand what your boss's expectations are really, what you're missing. So when you communicate, you open yourself the opportunity, you give yourself the opportunity to understand what the other person is expecting from you and what it is that you're doing. Right? Much in the same way with God. We all have two opportunities. One is a very personal opportunity. The things that I do in my daily life are going to reflect how much I want to be in a right relationship with God. That's a personal relationship. And then the communal relationship, how all of us relate to each other, is going to demonstrate how good of a right relationship we want to have with God, or we're having with God. So, the idea here is that God's righteousness demands that we do the two things. One, that we understand what we're doing, and that we do things differently with the people around us. Ideally, if we have a good relationship with God, if we have this personal relationship with God, if we are loving God, that will reflect in the relationship we have with others, and in the way that our community is thriving or not thriving. Here we're going to talk about now the prophet. So if we have this need to say, you need need the two pieces. You need the personal and the communal. You need to keep those in mind all the time. The prophet is supposed to ask you to examine both of them. And not only that, the prophet is going to give you some guidelines to follow. So let's read what the screen says. The prophetic role in the Hebrew Bible, that do what is just. For my salvation is about to come. My justice about to be revealed. Happy is the one who does this. Whoever holds fast to it, keeping the Sabbath without profaning it, keeping one's hand from doing any evil. Let me point your attention to two pieces, the last two pieces of the reading. It mentions the Sabbath. For us in our Catholic tradition, what do we understand as the Sabbath? Let me pick on Jim. Jim, what do we understand in our Catholic tradition as a Sabbath? Sunday, and more than Sunday, it's observing Sunday by coming to Mass, being involved in the liturgy, participating in the liturgy, making the time to be with your community and with God. That is what really this is asking us. Make the time. Be with the people that love you. Be with your community. Be with God who loves you so much. Take that time to spend that time with God and with the other people who, like you, are trying their darn best to love God. That's the first thing that that's being asked of us. Please join your community for liturgy. Second, keeping one's hand from doing any evil. When we talked about Adam and Eve, we said that, or I said that one thing was thinking, and the other was feeling in your heart. So, typically, right, when we do something, do we plan it or do we not plan it? Kind of, right? Ideally, you plan everything. Right? You make a conscious decision of doing something, especially using your arms or using your hands. Especially, there's an intention behind what you're doing. When you, for instance, now that I'm holding this microphone, am I thinking about this? You betcha. I am intentionally thinking about holding this microphone. I'm doing something purposely with my hands. I'm using my body to do something. And that's the idea here. All of us have this potential to really think about what we're doing. And for us, it's asking us, don't do any evil. Keep your hands from doing any evil. I explained to you last week that I'm a caregiver, right? So I've been a caregiver for about 20 years. And as a caregiver, you have to use your hands all the time. And you also have to wash your hands all the time. Right? So I'm extremely mindful of what I do with my hands all the time. Perhaps I am especially mindful because I know that everything I do with my hands has an outcome. When we had the unfortunate situation of going through COVID for the last 3 years, 2019, right? 2019, at the end of 2019, 2020, I had to be very intentional about using my hands. I had to wear gloves, right? I had to wear a mask all the time, as much as possible. Not so much for me, but as a caregiver is to protect someone else. Protect someone else. So we spoke last week about being caretakers of creation. Do we remember that? So are all of us considered part of creation? Yes. Yes. By all means. So when we're talking about being caretakers of creation, it's not only about the natural world, but about each other. How do we reach out to other people? How do we metaphorically use our hands to hurt someone else, to care for someone else? I have the privilege of being a caregiver, and I can have a direct understanding of what it means to use my hands. But so do you. In this case, with the biblical reading, keeping our hands from doing any evil are just two wonderful reminders. Hey, first, make a time to be with your community. Please, make a time to be with God. Be with the people that love God, the same way that you do. And also, be good caretakers of each other. Try to stay away from doing evil. So for this exercise, I want you to use the handout that has the two biblical readings, and we just read the warning of the flood when we started class. Turn the page over. Okay? Do we have it? Yes. So, what I would like you to do is, I would like you to work in pairs one more time. So turn to the person next to you, and you'll see that some of the words are highlighted or underlined. When you come to the underlined phrase or word, I want you to take a special care in saying that word. So for example, verse 4. Yes, your fast ends in quarreling and fighting, striking with wicked club. Without today, you might fast just to make your voice heard on high. So read to the person right next to you. If you can, read it twice. First, one person reads, the other listens, and then switch roles.
Then your light shall break forth like that, and your wound shall quickly be healed. Your vindication shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove from your midst oppression, false accusation, and malicious speech, if you bestow your bread on the hungry and satisfy the afflicted, then light shall rise for you in the darkness, and the gloom come for you. Then the Lord will guide you always and give you plenty even on the parched land. He will renew your strength and will shake you. Be like a watered garden, like a spring whose water never fails. If you're gonna be complaining, fighting, striking, and wicked clothes because you're hungry and you were fasting, don't do it. Right? Basically, that you don't do it. Rather, is the fasting that I wish releasing those bounds and just see, and that's what people say. Oh, I'm gonna stop, eating meat. I mean, is that really going to give a sacrifice, to help others or to please God? No. You're going to turn into that, so don't do it.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that passage. Is everybody almost done?
Done. All done.
Perfect. So, for the people that have already finished, who of you were familiar with this biblical passage already? Raise hands, raise hands. So, some of you, which is great. Now, thinking about the New Testament, what does this remind you of?
The sermon.
Say that one more time, Maria.
The Sermon of the Mount.
Sermon on the Mount. Right? So, this reading gives us a very clear understanding of what fasting meant for the people of Israel in the Hebrew Bible. This is what fasting meant for them. And was it a personal fast? Did it have personal implications? Yes. Yes. They had to do something. It was not just about being spiritual about it. There was an action involved. A lot of it is actions. Do this. Do that. What else happens in the story? What else happens in this biblical passage? Something that caught your eye.
The Beatitudes.
The Beatitudes. Yes. Sermon on the Mount. Right? Who else remembers the judgment of the nations? Matthew 25? Right? If you clothe the naked, right? When you did this to the least of me, you did it to me. Right? Two things about this biblical passage, and this is what I want you to get out of what we just read. Foretelling for the prophet. The prophet is telling you about something that's going to happen. What's going to happen in this biblical passage? What is God going to do?
Going to listen to you. It's not going to respond.
God will listen to you.
He's gonna say, here I am.
Here I am. But his salvation, right? Right? His salvation is going to happen. So the prophet will tell you about a future outcome. God will be doing this. This is what God is going to do. The other thing that the prophet will do is he will tell you what's not working well in your community. And we refer to that in the first case when the prophet is telling you about a future event. That's foretelling. He's anticipating the future. He's telling you that God will come. He will listen to you. Salvation is just around the corner. But he will also tell you, hey, but you gotta do something else. God will come. God will be so readily available to you, but you have to do something else. And that's foretell. Things are not at their very best in your community. And he's mentioning a few things in here. The prophet, right? Let's go to the text. So it says, verse 7, sharing your bread with the hungry, sheltering the oppressed and the homeless, clothing the naked when you see them, and not turning your back on your own. If the prophet is saying that this needs to happen, it's because it's not happening. It's not happening in the community. So he's reminding you, this is what God is asking you to do. Please, do it. Please, let us do it. Not just you, but all of us. For us, in recent times, when we think about what God is saying in verse 7, we speak of that as a common good. So the common good is telling you, the common good embraces the sum of those conditions of social life by which individuals, families, and groups achieve their own fulfillment in a relatively thorough and ready way. Go back to verse 7. Does verse 7 fit that description? Would you say yes or no? Yes. By all means. So what we see in the Bible, we have given it a different term for us to understand it differently and better. The common good. It is not just Tony's progress. It's not just Father Sam's well-being. It's our common good. All of us share this goodness. From our Franciscan tradition, we have the example of a theologian, John Duns Scotus. And he is making this simple formula of equating God with love. So God is love. He's asking us, live in the reality of love with God and one another. Does that echo what we just read? Yes. Yes. Moral living shall be inspired not by sin, but by the incarnation. And the incarnation is present in Jesus. But not only in Jesus, it's present in you and in me. Because all of us are children of God. So the goal that we have is being reminded of the two things that we have to do. One is we have to be in right relationship with God. Think of Adam and Eve. Think of Noah. Be with God. The second thing that we're asked to do is be in right relationship with the people around us, our community. As I said, you can think about it in the best positive terms. Join us, be with God. Not only make the time from home. Many of us experience the beauty of live stream services when we went through the pandemic. We had that for us. I remember that my mom really got into it, and we were so happy that we had that opportunity, that we were able to have a computer, and that we were able to join a service from the Vatican, and especially from the Vatican. Never in my life, right, did I anticipate to be joining a service from the Vatican for Holy Week. Maybe that was available to me before, and I just dismissed it altogether. But the time was right. And so the time is always right. Go back to the beginnings of the book of Genesis. This beautiful picture of harmony with God, with each other, with creation. And if that has been undone, be reminded of what the prophets say. Go back. Go back. Go back to loving God. Go back to loving each other. Go back. That reminder that we keep hearing from our saints. Please listen to God. Please make sure that you follow through. Just don't listen, but take action. And so that's our challenge, right? One of the things that happens with me is that I'm not able to hear very well. When I was a little kid, I had an ear infection. And that has transformed my life in many ways. For the better and for the worse. So sometimes I'm in conversation with people and they say something. And I can't understand what they're saying. Not because I can't understand, but because I can hear it. And so when you can't hear something, what do you do?
Huh?
You ask questions. You ask a lot of questions. So you have to get creative in your own way. If God is talking to you, and for whatever reason, you're not getting the message very well, like Job, Pat reminded us of Job, ask questions. Really interrogate God. Interrogate your community of faith. Seek answers. Always give yourself that opportunity. Pray. Don't give up. Right? That's my reminder and my invitation. Listen to God. If you're like me, who's not able to physically hear well, ask questions. Trust me, there's no shame in asking questions. It feels a little uncomfortable when you have to ask somebody, can you say that one more time? But then, be honest, be brutally honest. You know what? I'm deaf. I'm hard of hearing. Same thing with God. God, I'm not getting it. I'm not hearing your message. Can you say it in a different way? And you ask the question. And the person you're talking to will tell you something in a slightly different way. And then you'll get it. Please, give yourself that chance. Ask the question. Ask God for wisdom, for guidance. And if you don't get it right the first time, ask again. And ask the people around you to help you out. A couple of times I asked my grandmother, hey, Grandma, what are they talking about? And then she tells me, right? And so she's like my 83-year-old grandmother. And she can hear better than me, right? Well, same thing with you, people of God. Maybe somebody has heard the same message before from God. And maybe it's a chance for them to help you out. In this case, we have the prophets. And it's a wonderful opportunity that we have to listen to the prophets. And we have the modern prophets, like Deacon Sal, and even yourselves, to remind us, let's go back to that loving picture of harmony with God. So we're going to take a break for part 2. Thank you.
No, I cannot pause.
Mute it? It's mute?
I can mute it.
because I am bilingual and Spanish is my first language, I'm a native Spanish speaker, my professor recruited me to help her interview the religious communities who did not have a bilingual representative. So one of the things that I did is I was responsible for interviewing about 7 different communities. And it was a fascinating process. I think that it's probably the best thing that I remember about my days as a result of FST. So the reason that I like this experience so much is because it introduced me to theater. One of the things that I found out as I was interviewing the sisters is that consistently many of them were saying, we wish we had arts programs to be able to help these kids and their families. So the arts had an impact, a positive impact on the kids and the families who were able to have access to them. So we're going to do an exercise, and we're going to do a theater exercise. So that's the point of my story. I need you to help me with the following exercise. So I'm going to need 2 volunteers. So we have 1 volunteer, and we have 2 volunteers. So I would like my volunteers to come up to the front of the class. And I would like 1 volunteer to stand here at this end and face that wall. Volunteer number 1. And I'm going to refer to volunteers as 1 and 2. Volunteer number 2, I need you to look that way. Okay, so I have my 2 volunteers, and now I need to give you some instructions. So my volunteers, what I'm going to say doesn't apply to you. So ignore this, what I'm about to say, and you too, ignore this. For everybody else, what I need you to do is I need you to listen and pay close attention to what's going to happen now. So what am I asking you to do?
Pay attention.
So at all times, you have to be very quiet. That is the one thing that I ask you to do. Be very, very quiet. Okay, so pay attention and listen carefully. Okay, so my volunteers, I need you to face the wall that has the exit sign on it, which is to your left and which is to your right. Okay. So let's pretend that this young woman is meeting this young man for the very first time in their lives. So they've never seen each other. So now what I would like you to do, both of you, is just introduce yourself to the other person. It's really up to you. Go for it.
Nice to meet you. Now,
Hold it. Great. So I need you to freeze there for a minute. Were you paying attention?
Yes.
What just happened now? Anybody?
Introduction.
Okay.
They make no.
I want you to raise your hand and tell me, because we need to be very intentional about this. Pat.
They exchanged their names.
So we heard names. Yes, Maria.
They check hands. Shake hands.
Shook hands.
That's what I was going to say.
Shook hands. Okay. Names. Shook hands.
They leaned toward each other and they were very soft-spoken toward each other.
Okay. So we saw something that the young man did, right? Who saw what I'm trying to refer to? Yes.
Make the first move. The approach.
He approached. Uh-huh.
he introduced himself.
He went down to her level.
Yeah.
Can you say that one more time then?
Yes, he went down to her level.
He went down to her level. Okay, thank you so much, volunteers. You can go back to your seats.
Okay, I'm gonna just go quickie here.
Can we do this one more time with someone else?
Sure.
Okay, so let's see. Can you tell me your name?
Cassandra.
Cassandra, come back over here. Okay, so now I need another brave volunteer. Anybody?
I'll go.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. So, what I need to do now is, we're gonna do this a little differently, okay? Pretend that you're someone else, someone that you like a lot. Keep that in the back of your head. You know, think of somebody, like somebody that you really, really like. Okay, it can be, for instance, Batman for me, right? Somebody like that, okay. Same thing with you here. So what I need you to do is think of somebody you like a lot. You know, think of that. You have it? Okay. So now, we're going to pretend that these two people, whoever they are, we don't know who they are going to introduce themselves for the very first time. Okay, so we're going to do the same activity. We're going to listen very carefully, and we're going to watch. No, look, that's for you to do. You choose what you want to do. Just think of the person that you are, and think, how would this person, if I was Batman, right? How would I introduce myself to whoever it is you are? And I don't know who you are, but that's the point of the game. Go for it. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so now what did we just see here? What was there? I didn't hear a whole lot of words, right? There was a lot of laughter, right? Thank you so much, Cassandra and Ellie. Yoo-hoo! Round of applause. Okay, so let's go through what we just did a minute ago. Okay, with Cassandra and Jim, we saw a few things there. Somebody mentioned names, right? They introduced each other, right? Then shaking hands, right? What else do you remember seeing? They came close, right? There was this effort to get close to the other person. It was very intentional, right? I mean, we had them here, far, right, apart, and they came, shook hands. Jim made a kind gesture of going down to the young woman's level. How was different from the other introduction? Yes?
It was natural the first time. It was just a natural being yourself.
Right, it was very natural. When the two sisters came to the front of the class, how was that different from the other introduction? Say that?
Pretending to be something they weren't.
Pretending to be somebody they weren't. That's key for us. And I want you to keep that in the back of your heads. One instance was two people, I asked them, right, to just introduce themselves in any way they wanted to. Sometimes people stay quiet. Sometimes people do say their names. Sometimes people actually hug. Right? So all of these are signs of love. In the other instance, I asked them to think of someone else and to pretend that they were someone else. Why is this important for us? Because sometimes, just sometimes, we're not honest with ourselves. Right? Sometimes we're not honest with ourselves in how we present ourselves to other people. And why is this important? Because a lot of what we give is a lot of what we get back. Right? So if we are not being thoroughly honest with the other person, do we anticipate honesty in return? No. It's just not going to happen. Okay. Go ahead and take your handout, and I need 5 volunteers. Now we're going to need 5 volunteers, and I need anybody who wants to be a reader to come up here, and I need 5 of you. Come on, both of you. Everybody, I need 5. Yay! Okay, we have 5. It's okay. Come, join us then. It's fine. So we can have 6. It's fine. Oh, you bring your papers. Oh, darn it, I forgot to tell you to bring your paper. Bring your paper with you. Sorry. Can you get a paper? Oh, okay. Okay. So I want you to get it on the line. You know, just like good old days when we're in school. So we're going to do numbers. Okay, so let's get a little closer. Let's move to the right. A little more. My right. It was my right. Okay, so Miss Pat will be 1. Martha, 2. 3. 4. I'm going to switch orders. So I'll ask you to be my leader because you helped me with this before. So when you move over to the left, 2 spaces, and 4. 5. And Miss Mary will be the leader. So let's see here, because everybody needs to have their own paper. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so reader number 1, start us off, please.
An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead, start again.
Forget that. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there?
He answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live.
But wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and took off, leaving him half dead.
Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side.
But a Samaritan, while traveling, came upon him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, treating them with oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.
Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise.
Okay. Thank you. Stay here just one more second. So all of us are familiar with this parable, right? I mean, we heard it millions of times. Right? I think it's just probably some of us get so used from hearing it that we tune out. Like, hey, I heard this before way many times. I don't need to listen to it one more time. Now, we're going to do something different. So what I would like all of us to do, the people who are sitting on the chairs, is imagine yourself being one of those three characters that we saw here. What do we have? We have the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan. But here's the catch. What I would like you to do is I would like you to think of somebody that you either helped or that you not helped intentionally at one point in your life. So this is where it gets very differently. Let me give you an example, and it will be a quick example. I have a friend whom I hadn't seen in many years, and he stopped by my house a couple of weeks ago. I was really busy. Trust me, I was really busy. And he wanted to hang out for a little bit. And I was just busy. Just very busy, right? And I remember thinking to myself, oh God, why now?
Yeah, why not?
Why now? Well, it took my mom for me to sit down and actually sit down with this friend. And I enjoyed it, right? But my first reaction was, I don't have time. I didn't invite you to come. I didn't ask you to come. I'm sorry, but I can't. But it feels very nice that we made time and that we talked to this friend of mine. And I'm genuinely busy a lot of the time. I think that all of us are genuinely busy with good intentions all the time. But as we reread, as we hear the story again, think about that one person, or at least one person whom you've not helped before. And imagine yourself dealing with this one person as you hear the story. Is that?
An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there?
He answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live.
But wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and took off, leaving him half dead.
Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side.
But a Samaritan, while traveling, came upon him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, treating them with oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.
Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise.
Thank you, hermano. applause for the volunteers. There's promise, there's potential among us. Okay. So here's the challenge for you for the next minute or so. Remember the person that you didn't help. That one time. Think about that person right now. It could be a man or woman, it could be family member, total stranger. And ask yourself, okay, what if, it was me who didn't help the person who was beat up? What if maybe, I needed to be the Samaritan for that one person that one day? What if, God, put me there, to help that one person in that moment? So, without, putting you on the spot, do you think that maybe after reading this parable, you may have acted differently with that person? It's possible, right? I think that it's possible that we all could have done something more for that person. It's quite likely that all of us could have done that. It's also possible that we couldn't, that we genuinely could not help that person. Right? There are instances. I was giving you the example last week that my mom was a victim of domestic violence. And there were instances when there was little that I could do personally. But I could always call 911 in hope that someone stronger and more qualified than me will be able to step in and help my mom. In this case, it was the police. And I told you how good it felt to know that we were protected. So, as you think about the parable of the Good Samaritan moving forward, realize that most of us have that choice, just like the characters in the story, of helping and not helping. When we think of social justice, and before I go there, let's go to the very last part of the leader. Look at your page. And Pat, a minute ago, came in, the two of us, I think, Pat and I were talking, and we were talking about mercy. We were talking about the significance of mercy in our lives. And for us, mercy has a special place because God has been merciful to us. He has been very merciful to us. So He's asking us to do the same, to show mercy to others. So, one of the ways that we show mercy to others is using this model. This is a theological model, very simple and very easy to remember. I was telling the young kids from confirmation, if there's anything that I want you to remember about the class today, is this model. Keep this model in the back of your heads all the time. And the model is very simple because it says, see, judge, and act. 3 simple steps. I was telling the kids, I'm gonna take you back to your days to grammar school, to elementary school, and just remind you, when your teacher would ask you, repeat after me, see, judge, act. So I'm gonna ask you to do the same thing for us tonight. Repeat after me. See, judge, act. Very easy. When we had the little exercise a minute ago, I asked you to see, to pay attention. What we saw with Jim and Cassandra is that they looked at each other, right? So there was that probably eye-to-eye contact. They acknowledged each other. They came in contact. I'm sure that sometime during that process, Jane realized that Cassandra was a little smaller, right? Did you realize that she was a little smaller? Yes. So when Jim realized that Cassandra was a little smaller, he made a judgment. Let me go down to her level. Right? It's a physical action. He responded to her. He could have easily just stood from a distance and said, hey, good meeting you. Many of us went through that painful experience during COVID, right? When we didn't understand much about the virus. And out of respect for the other person, we had to honor their physical space. Safe distancing, correct? We had to be very mindful of the possibility for us to be carriers of the virus. In this case, I'm imagining that Jim has been vaccinated, or at the very least, is very careful with the way that he takes care of Cassandra. So he made a judgment, and Cassandra made also a judgment, right? What did Cassandra do the moment that Jim, she stepped forward, and I'm not sure what happened. Was it Jim that reached out? Or was it Cassandra that reached out?
Cassandra.
Cassandra? Okay. So Cassandra made a choice. Jim comes forth, Cassandra reaches out. So the moment that we reach out, somebody reaches back to us. Right? It's just innate. Unless the person has some sort of fear. Right? And if that fear kicks in, then we also have to be respectful of the fear. And then we have to make another judgment. Why is that fear in place? In this case, there was a harmony of two people getting to know each other, reaching towards the other person, acting. There was a little bit of a conversation, right, Jim? And I didn't quite get what happened, right? Because I think Cassandra asked to do the exercise a second time. Is that what happened, Jim?
During our conversation, I asked her name, and then she responded, and I said mine.
Okay. But then something else happened, right? She asked to do the exercise again?
I asked you if we could do that, and I think she volunteered to do that.
Okay, right. So there was an intention, right? So there is an initial contact, and then that leads to something new. The possibility to do it again. Was that a favorable experience?
Yes.
Right, because she has to do it again. She could have said, no way. Right, I'm not going to do this again. Let me go back to my seat, but we didn't see that. So let's remember this model again. See what is happening around us. What do we see? We can apply this to the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? What is happening in the beginning of the story? Anybody?
The guy is injured.
There's somebody injured. And then what else?
Well, people are ignoring the injury,
People are walking by.
walking by and ignoring.
Right.
Even people are supposedly,
Okay, so then there's the judgment, right? So someone is getting ignored. And what do we know about them? Did they have legitimate reasons for ignoring this person?
They're afraid.
Maybe.
well, they think
Partly.
so. They think so.
Partly, right? It's just like me in the story about my friend. Did I have legitimate reasons to say, hey, I don't have the time? I had a valid reason, right? I could say, really, this is not the time for me. Please, I'll call you sometime.
Could it also be fear? Great fear.
We were talking about fear a second ago, right? Sometimes there's fear in place, and we have to understand why the fear is happening. And so that's where the last step comes in. How do we respond? Acting. So if we understand that there's fear, how do we see fear? What are some clues that we see about fear? Yes?
Someone backs away from you.
Body language, right? Distancing. What else? Don't close. Don't come near me. You're very verbal. Stop. Right? So either there's a distancing or there is a way of expressing that we don't want something. Right? Very serious case of a fear. What else happens? Vern, I'm gonna pick on you.
Very serious.
Very serious case of fear.
Fight or flight.
Fight or flight, and then protecting yourself. Right? So, yes, Pat.
Can I share a story that keeps going over and over in my head?
Sure.
When I was young, in my 20s, and a brand new graduate nurse had a job in Baltimore, Maryland. And one day I was walking down the street, and I see this man crumpled on the ground. And my instinct was to go and see, is he okay? Maybe I can help him. So I reached down to him, and I said, are you okay? He reached up and grabbed me and tried to pull me down because he was drunk. At which point I said, oops. And I disengaged and I went away quickly because I had fear then. And the problem is that it put me in a frame of mind where I'm more careful about what I get involved in, and sometimes I shouldn't be so careful.
Well, that's a very honest example, right? Many of us don't know everything about people's intentions, right? I think that we have to be mindful of how limited knowledge we have. There's times where we don't see enough clues, we don't have enough information to make an informed judgment about something. In those cases, I think that it's legitimately correct to suspend your judgment. And that's a legitimate action that we can take. I just don't know how to act. I think that in moral theology, we have to remember that intention means a lot. Let me give you an example. If I hit Jim on the face, right? more than likely it's intentionally, right? If I think about it. But if I am right next to Jim and somehow I bump against him, I hit him too, but the intentions are not there to harm Jim. Much in the same way for us, if we act in an outcome, something happens that we can't control. In this case, I hit Jim, I bump into him. Then I'm sure that he will understand that I didn't have the intention of hitting him, and he will be forgiving. Much in the same way, when we're approaching complicated issues, if we don't know how to act, it's okay to seek more information. And that's where even judging that you don't know what to do, it's legitimate. So if you can do something, act on it. If you don't have enough information to help you choose rightly, then either seek someone else to help you, or maybe reconsider your options. This is going to become clear in a second. In our Catholic tradition, we believe in charity, right? We believe that all of us are children of God. That's a given. So, if we believe that all of us are children of God, then it's only natural that we treat each other as brothers and sisters. It's not easy, right? But that's the ideal. If we believe that all of us are children of God, then it follows that all of us are brothers and sisters. It's a very simple ideal. One way that we do that, treating each other as brothers and sisters, is what Pat and I talked about earlier, mercy. Just show mercy to the person next to you. And I was asking last week, whoever is a religious ed teacher, how many acts of mercy do we have? 7 corporal. And then we have 7 spiritual as well. So these are tangible, easy ways to be what we agreed on last week. Readily visible signs of freely giving grace from God. So we have these 7 corporal works of mercy, and we have 7 spiritual acts of mercy or works of mercy. So, what happens if I don't understand what's going on? The example about fear. So with fear, the person who may be exhibiting some fear, my task is to try to understand that fear. If I genuinely want to help that person, how do I go about it? Well, I can counsel the person, right? I can try to talk to that person. Where is this fear coming from? How did it originate? And try to help that person overcome the fear in a loving way. When we have this opportunity, not only the corporal, but also the spiritual, then we have the opportunity to relate to each other as brothers and sisters. And we're going to look at the last handout that we have. So, pull the handout out. It has the 2 feet on it. Yes?
Please repeat how you define mercy.
Yes. So I did not purposely define mercy. But Right, so the only way that I can explain, because I think the mercy is beyond what I can do. I think this mercy is this freely given grace from God. And we saw that last week. So God has been merciful to us. We have received this grace from Him. And so our responsibility is to share that grace with other people. So, because it's grace, it keeps us from judging incorrectly the person in front of us. In the case of Pat and I were talking about people who are in jail. There's a number of reasons why people can be in jail. You can say, well, some people make mistakes. And that's true. Some people make genuine mistakes. But it's also possible that our laws are not very forgiving of some people. For instance, we can think of blue-collar crime and white-collar crime. Why do we apply the laws differently to people based on their means? We can say, well, they're different, right? They're different offenses. Well, at the end of the day, I think that both of them are causing some sort of injustice in society. And we're going to look at that right now. So look at your handout with the 2 feet of love in action. And what you see in front of you are, on the one hand, is charity, I believe. Social justice. So social justice, we have, take it home, look at it a little more, read it in detail. But let me just read off the top of the graphic where it says social justice. It seeks to remove root causes and improve structures. Just keep that in mind. Social justice removes root causes and improves the structures. Contrast that to charitable works, where we meet the basic needs of it and we aid individuals. So, the way we do social justice is again being mindful of the model. See, judge, act. And let me give you one final example as we wrap up. Who here has a special day during the year that you can think of? Many of us have a birthday, right? All of us have a birthday. So, but what other special dates come to mind when you think about the year? Anybody? Ben?
Wedding anniversary.
Wedding anniversary. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Ben. Wedding anniversary for you.
June 6th, 1990. We were married June 6th, 1992.
June 6th. Okay. Any other special date for anybody? Yes, Jim.
Family Day,
Family Day.
for adoptive parents when they bring their child home.
Okay, and what's the date for you?
March 12th.
March 12th. June 6th and March 12th. 2 very different, important dates, right? Well, they celebrate family, though, right? In this case, both Ben and Jim, they're special to them because it's about their family. Anyone else? Yes?
Baptismal anniversary.
Oh, baptismal anniversary. That's very nice. And what's the date?
May 2nd. May 2nd.
May 2nd. Okay. So, I remember I also have a special day during the year. For me, it is May 25th. And it's not my birthday, by any means. It happens to be my first girlfriend's birthday. So May 25th. I remember her very dearly, but something else happened on May 25th for me. That's the date when I graduated from graduate school, May 25th, 2019. But May 25th, as happy a day as it is for me, is also a very dark day in the history of our country. May 25th, 2020, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Does anybody know what happened that day? Jim?
George Floyd died.
George Floyd died. May 25th. So May 25th has a special meaning for me for a number of reasons. And it's important for me to remember how happy a day it is for me, but how sad a day it was for someone else, for a whole community, and for our country. So, every May 25th, I make it a point to do something special. This year, I am volunteering with the County of San Diego. They're going to have a special cleanup event with children in Mission Bay. And it's going to be my special way to celebrate May 25th. The point of my story is that because of COVID in 2020, many people in our country took to the streets, and there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of pain, there was a lot of not knowing what was right, what was happening. If you remember, I said that I love seeing the police come to my house. I genuinely needed to have the police at my house when my mom was being beat up by my stepfather. I genuinely appreciate the police, and they have a special place in my heart for that. But it also broke my heart to see the images of some police officers in Minneapolis. And it hurt. It hurt really, really bad. Well, I'm a caregiver, so I could not go out to the streets. I could not be around large crowds and voice my dissent and my discontent and holding our authorities accountable and asking for some help. I could not do that. And I felt terrible because I had to do something about it. Right? God asked us to be loving people, to undo injustice, to seek what's right, to work with my community, to be together with communities that are hurting. And I couldn't do that because I'm a caregiver. Right? But there was something that I could do. So I reached out to a local nonprofit who has this capacity to talk to public officials. And we had some meetings, and we decided, hey, what can we do in Oceanside to help our police and also help our community, make sure that this doesn't happen to us. So we had a few meetings with public officials from the city of Oceanside, and we asked them, first, help us choose the right candidate for the chief of police. Help us choose the right candidate. So the city manager talked to us and said, okay, let's have some dialogue, let's have some conversation. We were able to talk to the new chief of police, and we expressed to the chief of police our concerns. he understood our concerns, and he said, okay, let's work on this together. So we had more meetings, and then we agreed that the policy manual that was in force for the then police department had to be revised. And it had to make it clear that police officers should try to de-escalate, and that was mandatory, that the change had to happen at the personal level with the police officer, but that the police department was supporting them, and that the community was supporting them. So we had a final meeting. The police department agreed to changing the narrative and to helping the community at large realize that the police is there to protect us. And we as a community are there to support them. So the point of my story is that there's times when we really have to do our homework, when we really have to have meetings, face-to-face meetings, honest meetings, when we say what we need and we support each other. In this case, we supported the decision of the chief of police, and the Oceanside Police Department has a new chief of police. But the promise that we have from them is that we're not going to reach that level. That's not an option for us. Our leaders have agreed with the community that that kind of violence that took place in Minneapolis is not going to happen in our city. Because we both agree, both the police and the community, that we want a loving community. So the point of my story is, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of research. It takes a lot of seeing, judging, and acting. But social justice is possible. We have a loving God and we have a loving community. So that will be my challenge as you go forward. Come next week, because we need you. We need you here. We need you to be mindful of the possibilities that we have to really and genuinely love each other. I know it's hard work, and I know it's tricky, and I know that I'm not the best and the most prepared teacher or facilitator, but we're learning together. We're giving ourselves that chance. So, as we go forward, let's close in prayer. And I'm going to blow this up because this is going to be a little tricky. Oops. Okay, so if you can, from where you are you able to read it? Yes. So we're going to do the same activity. We're going to read this aloud together as best as you can. If you fall back, just catch up. Or just, do it on your own quietly. Let us begin in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, give us hearts that listen for your word. Let us imitate the Good Samaritan who does not turn away from suffering. Help us listen. May we listen to those who struggle daily for dignity. Let us hear your voice with the stories of those on the margins. Help us always see what binds us together as sisters and brothers. Help us to heal.
May we be willing to stand in the place of others.
Let us be open to
difference that we may arrive at understanding. Help us to seek reconciliation, that our world may reflect justice.
Help us respond. May our faith move us to action in the public square. Let us work with others for goodwill, find solutions together. Help us exercise political charity, seeking the common good and dignity for all. Lord, give us the courage to trust in your hand guiding us. Give us the courage to respond with Good Samaritan, setting aside divisions to attend to the needs of the others. May we know and see your love present in our communities, made real in the ways we love one another. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.